What would you do if, in the quiet of your heart, you felt a conviction so strong it shook the foundation of your entire life? Not a whisper of laziness, not frustration from a bad week at work, but something deeper, something unsettling, a thought that refuses to leave you alone. Quit your job. This is your only job now. For many people, that sentence sounds reckless, irresponsible, even dangerous. We are taught from childhood that stability equals safety. A steady paycheck means security. A title means identity. A routine means control. So when an inner conviction challenges all of that, it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff without knowing what waits below. But what if the cliff is not destruction? What if it is redirection? Throughout history, there have always been individuals who felt separated from the ordinary rhythm of life. Not because they were better than others, not because they were superior, but because they sensed an unusual responsibility pressing on their conscience, a responsibility that could not be fulfilled from behind a desk they no longer felt aligned with, a responsibility that demanded focus, sacrifice, and courage. Have you ever noticed how dissatisfaction can sometimes be a signal rather than a problem? When every morning feels heavy, when your spirit feels drained even though your body is capable, when success on paper feels empty inside, could it be that something within you is calling for alignment? Now, let's be clear. This is not about impulsively abandoning responsibilities. It is not about neglecting family, obligations, or ethical duties. Recklessness is not courage, and confusion is not clarity. The difference lies in intention and discernment. There are moments in life when your work no longer feels like a contribution, but like a distraction from your deeper assignment. You may still perform well. You may still receive praise. Yet internally, there is a growing discomfort. A quiet awareness that your time is being invested in something that does not match the weight of what you feel you are meant to carry. Why does that feeling intensify instead of fading? Because purpose does not negotiate forever. It knocks, then it whispers, and eventually it confronts. But here is the uncomfortable question: are you willing to be misunderstood? When someone steps away from what society labels as stable, criticism follows. People question your judgment. They warn you about failure. They assume you are acting emotionally. And sometimes their concern is sincere, yet no one else can fully measure what you are sensing internally. No one else feels the same urgency that keeps you awake at night. There is a difference between chasing dreams and responding to calling. Dreams often revolve around personal ambition. Calling feels heavier. It feels less about personal gain and more about responsibility. It feels like something entrusted to you rather than something you invented. And that is where fear enters. What if you are wrong? What if you leave and nothing works out? What if the conviction was only temporary emotion? These questions are valid. They protect you from arrogance. But they can also paralyze you into permanent hesitation. Consider this. What if staying where you are is the greater risk? What if ignoring that persistent conviction slowly erodes your integrity? Over time, misalignment can lead to resentment. Resentment leads to burnout. Burnout leads to disconnection from your work, from your values, and even from yourself. Sometimes the instruction to quit is not about employment at all. It is about identity. It is about releasing a version of yourself that no longer fits. It is about stepping away from external validation so you can confront internal truth. The real question is not, should I quit? The real question is, what is my only job now? Is it to build something meaningful? To serve in a way that aligns with your conscience? To speak when silence feels dishonest? to create when suppression feels suffocating. Every generation has individuals who sense that their task cannot be postponed. Not because they are extraordinary beings, but because they are willing to respond when conviction becomes unavoidable. The decision is rarely comfortable. It rarely looks logical from the outside. But when alignment replaces confusion, there is a quiet steadiness that fear cannot erase. And perhaps that steadiness is the first sign that your real work is waiting. The moment you begin to seriously consider walking away from what is familiar, something inside you shifts. The question is no longer hypothetical. It becomes personal, real, immediate, and with that shift comes resistance. Not just resistance from others, but resistance from within. Your mind starts calculating bills, responsibilities, expectations, reputation, years of education, years of effort. You remind yourself how hard it was to get here. You tell yourself that stability is a blessing, and that walking away from it might be ingratitude. You wonder if you are confusing restlessness with responsibility. This is the tension that defines every turning point. When people hear the phrase, "This is your only job now," they often imagine something dramatic, a grand mission, a public calling, a spotlight. But in reality, your only job may not look impressive at all. It might be quiet, it might be unseen, it might require rebuilding from zero. So why does it feel so heavy? Because when something becomes your only job, it demands focus. You can no longer treat it as a side project. You can no longer hide behind excuses like, "I'm too busy," or "maybe next year." If you believe you are being redirected, then distraction becomes disobedience to your own conscience. And that is uncomfortable. There is a reason many people sense a deeper purpose, but never act on it. Acting forces you to confront your fear of inadequacy. It forces you to admit that you might fail publicly. It removes the safety net of saying, "I would have tried, but I didn't have the time." Once you quit, once you step forward, you no longer have that excuse. But let's examine something important. Not every strong feeling is guidance. Not every frustration is a sign to leave. Discernment requires reflection, patience, and honesty. Are you running away from discomfort, or are you moving toward alignment? There is a difference. Running away is fueled by anger and ego. Moving toward alignment is often accompanied by humility. It does not shout, "I deserve more." Instead, it quietly says, "I cannot ignore this anymore." Have you noticed how true conviction usually humbles you? It makes you aware of your limitations. It makes you realize that if you take this step, you will need growth, discipline, and perhaps support from others. It does not inflate your pride. It tests your sincerity. And here is another truth. Sometimes the instruction to quit your job is symbolic. It may not mean resigning tomorrow. It may mean detaching your identity from your position. It may mean refusing to let your paycheck define your worth. It may mean preparing internally before making any external change. Many people want clarity before courage. But often, clarity comes because of courage. Think about it. When you are comfortable, you rarely discover your capacity. Pressure reveals potential. Commitment reveals character. When something becomes your only job, you are forced to sharpen your focus. You are forced to ask, what truly matters? What am I willing to sacrifice for? And sacrifice is the hidden cost no one talks about. Sacrifice of comfort. Sacrifice of approval. Sacrifice of predictability. When you step into alignment, you may lose the applause of those who only understood the old version of you. You may outgrow conversations that once felt normal. You may experience loneliness. Are you prepared for that? Because the path of purpose is rarely crowded at the beginning. It is often isolating. Not because you are superior, but because transition separates you from those who are not in the same season. But isolation can refine you. It strips away distraction. It exposes your intentions. It forces you to rely on discipline rather than motivation. When excitement fades, commitment remains. And this is where the real test begins. If this is truly your only job now, are you willing to treat it like one? To wake up with structure, to develop skill, to remain consistent even when results are invisible, to continue when encouragement is absent. Many people romanticize calling, but they underestimate responsibility. If you believe you are being redirected towards something meaningful, then excellence becomes non-negotiable. Integrity becomes essential. Patience becomes necessary, because purpose without discipline collapses. So the question shifts again. It is no longer, should I quit? It becomes, am I prepared to carry what comes next? That answer requires honesty. And honesty is where transformation truly begins. There comes a point when the idea is no longer theoretical. You have reflected. You have questioned yourself. You have examined your motives. And now you are standing in a space where comfort feels dishonest. Staying feels heavier than leaving. This is the crossroads few people talk about. It is easy to be inspired. It is easy to imagine a different life, but it is much harder to dismantle the structure you built with your own hands. Your routine, your reputation, your sense of certainty. Letting go can feel like erasing proof that your past effort mattered. But what if it is not erasing? What if it is evolving? When something becomes your only job, it reorders your priorities. You start evaluating how you spend your hours. You begin noticing how much energy is wasted on things that do not move you toward alignment. Conversations shift. Habits shift. Even your tolerance for distraction decreases. Why? Because clarity sharpens vision, and clarity can be uncomfortable. You may realize that some relationships were tied to your former identity. You may see that certain environments were sustained by who you used to be, not who you are becoming. Growth exposes incompatibility, not as judgment, but as reality. Are you willing to accept that growth sometimes creates distance? This is where many people retreat, not because they lack ability, but because they fear isolation. It is difficult to walk into a season where fewer people understand you. It is difficult to explain a decision that even you cannot fully articulate yet. Sometimes all you can say is, I know I cannot stay where I am, and that has to be enough. When you step away from what is familiar, something unexpected happens. You begin confronting yourself more honestly, without the constant noise of routine. Your insecurities surface. Your doubts grow louder. The question of, am I capable, becomes unavoidable. This is not a sign you made the wrong choice. It is a sign you are entering unfamiliar territory. Every meaningful shift requires rebuilding confidence. Not the loud, performative confidence that seeks validation, but the quiet confidence that develops through discipline, through showing up when no one is watching, through continuing when progress is slow, because progress will likely be slow. If this is your only job now, there may be days when you question everything, days when results are invisible, days when you wonder if stability would have been easier. And it would have been easier. But easier does not always mean aligned. Alignment demands patience. Consider this: when you were employed in your previous role, you understood the structure. You knew the expectations. You knew the path of advancement. Now, you may be creating structure from nothing. You may be designing your own standards. That freedom is powerful, but it is also heavy. Freedom without discipline becomes chaos. Freedom with discipline becomes growth. So you must ask yourself, what kind of freedom are you choosing? If you are serious about this transition, then your daily actions must reflect it. You cannot treat your new direction casually. You cannot wait for motivation. Motivation is temporary. Commitment is sustained by values, and values are tested when no one applauds you. There is also another truth many avoid. Not everyone who leaves is meant to succeed immediately. Some transitions are about training, about strengthening resilience, about exposing weaknesses so they can be corrected. What looks like delay may actually be preparation. Can you trust the process without needing constant proof? This is where maturity separates impulse from intention. Impulse demands immediate reward. Intention is willing to endure the process. If your shift is grounded in reflection and integrity, then you will approach it with patience rather than entitlement. And gradually, something changes within you. The fear that once felt overwhelming begins to shrink. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because your focus deepens. You stop obsessing over outcomes and start concentrating on effort. You begin to understand that your only job now is not simply a task. It is a transformation, a reshaping of identity, a refining of discipline, a strengthening of character. And transformation rarely happens without tension. But tension, when embraced with wisdom, can become the force that shapes you into someone capable of carrying what you once only imagined. At some point, the noise fades. The opinions, the fear, the constant back and forth in your mind. What once felt chaotic begins to settle into something steady, not perfectly clear, not completely mapped out, but steady. And that steadiness changes everything. You start to realize that quitting was never the real story. The real story was obedience to conviction. The real story was refusing to live divided between what feels safe and what feels sincere. The real story was choosing alignment over appearance. Because appearance can be maintained for years, you can look successful while feeling misaligned. You can meet expectations while quietly disconnecting from your own sense of purpose. From the outside, everything can seem stable, but internally, something feels unfinished. When you accept that this is your only job now, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop saying, maybe later. You stop postponing growth. You stop waiting for ideal conditions. Instead, you begin building. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but intentionally. You build discipline into your mornings. You build structure into your days. You build resilience into your mindset. You stop romanticizing the journey and start respecting it. Because now, there is no backup identity to hide behind. There is no convenient excuse. There is only responsibility. And responsibility matures you. Have you noticed how clarity often brings peace? Even when circumstances are uncertain, it is possible to face financial risk and still feel internally grounded. It is possible to walk into unfamiliar territory and still feel aligned. That peace does not come from guaranteed outcomes. It comes from integrity. Integrity is when your actions match your convictions. When that alignment happens, something powerful shifts inside you. You no longer seek constant validation. You no longer need everyone to understand. You no longer feel threatened by comparison. You are too focused on the work in front of you, and that focus becomes your anchor. But let's be honest, the journey will still test you. There will be moments of doubt. There will be days when progress seems invisible. There may even be setbacks that make you question your decision. Yet the difference now is that you understand why you started. You did not step forward out of ego. You stepped forward out of necessity, out of conscience, out of a deep awareness that staying would have cost you more than leaving. That awareness becomes fuel. Over time, the discipline you build begins to produce evidence. Small wins, gradual growth, subtle confirmations that your effort is not wasted. It may not happen overnight. It may not happen loudly, but it happens. And as it does, your confidence shifts from fragile to grounded. You realize that your only job was never about proving yourself to others. It was about becoming faithful to the responsibility you felt within. It was about refining your character. It was about stepping into maturity. Sometimes, quitting a job is less about employment and more about evolution. It is about closing one chapter so you can fully commit to another. It is about trusting that your capacity expands when you stop dividing your energy. So ask yourself one final question. If you knew that comfort would slowly erode your integrity, would you still choose it? If you knew that alignment required sacrifice, would you still step forward? If you knew that your growth depended on courage, would you hesitate? Every generation faces moments like this, moments where individuals must decide whether they will live by expectation or by conviction. Not recklessly, not arrogantly, but thoughtfully, ethically, with awareness of responsibility. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning behind the phrase, "This is your only job now." It is not a command to abandon wisdom. It is not a license for irresponsibility. It is an invitation to examine your life honestly, to measure where your time, energy, and focus are truly invested, to ask whether your current path reflects your highest values. When you answer that question sincerely, the path forward may not be easy, but it will be yours. And there is a quiet strength in that kind of ownership, a strength that no title can grant and no paycheck can replace. There is a moment, after the decision has been made and the dust begins to settle, when you finally understand that the external change was only the surface. The real shift happened internally. You think it was about leaving a job. It was never just that. It was about confronting dependency. Dependency on routine, dependency on approval, dependency on predictable outcomes. When those supports are removed, you are left with something raw and revealing: yourself. Who are you when there is no title attached to your name? Who are you when introductions no longer include your position? Who are you when progress depends entirely on your discipline rather than someone else's structure? This is where many discover that their only job now is mastery of self. Not in a selfish sense, not in isolation from responsibility, but in the sense of refining character so thoroughly that whatever you build next rests on something solid. Because if you carry old habits into a new assignment, you recreate the same dissatisfaction in a different form. That is why transition feels intense. It exposes patterns. Procrastination becomes obvious. Fear becomes undeniable. Insecurity becomes visible. And now you cannot blame the environment. You must confront what is within. This is not punishment. It is preparation. Growth requires honesty at a level most people avoid. It requires admitting that you sometimes stayed comfortable longer than you should have, that you sometimes chose familiarity over courage, that you sometimes silenced your own conviction to avoid conflict. But instead of shame, let that awareness create clarity. You are not starting over from nothing. You are starting again with wisdom. Think about how different your mindset is now compared to when the idea first appeared. At the beginning, everything felt emotional, urgent, unstable. Now, there is more grounding, more intention. You understand that purpose is not proven by excitement, but by consistency, and consistency is built in the ordinary days, when no one is watching, when results are slow, when doubt whispers again. That is when you decide, repeatedly, that this direction still aligns with your conscience. that this effort still reflects your values, that this sacrifice still carries meaning. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The fear that once dominated your thoughts becomes background noise. It does not disappear completely, but it loses authority. You move forward despite it. You act despite uncertainty. You build despite unpredictability. That is maturity, and maturity transforms risk into responsibility. You no longer see yourself as someone chasing an idea. You see yourself as someone entrusted with work that requires diligence. Whether that work is creative, service-oriented, entrepreneurial, educational, or deeply personal, you approach it with seriousness, because this is no longer about impulse. It is about alignment. There will still be challenges. There will still be seasons of waiting, but now you interpret them differently. Delay is not rejection. Difficulty is not failure. Criticism is not collapse. These are elements of refinement, and refinement strengthens resolve. Look back at the version of yourself who first felt that unsettling conviction. That version was unsure, hesitant, questioning. Now, even if the road ahead remains long, there is a deeper steadiness in you. You chose integrity over convenience. You chose growth over stagnation. You chose alignment over appearance. That choice alone reshapes identity. So if the phrase, "This is your only job now," ever echoes in your thoughts again, understand it differently. It is not pressure to perform. It is a reminder to focus, to commit fully to what aligns with your highest sense of responsibility, to stop dividing your energy between who you are and who you know you must become. Because in the end, your greatest work is not merely what you produce. It is who you become in the process. And when who you become reflects discipline, sincerity, courage, and integrity, then whatever you build carries weight. Not because it is loud, but because it is true.